The tech company's CEO, Marcus, told the janitor, "You just focus on cleaning, leave the technology to us," and laughed with his team. The 65-year-old Robert simply nodded and quietly continued his work. What the CEO didn't know was that this mere janitor actually possessed 10 times the wealth of his company's value, and very soon, he was going to prove it. Welcome to Hidden Story, where we uncover the extraordinary lives hiding in plain sight. Before we dive into this incredible story of workplace discrimination and hidden genius, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because we read and respond to every single one. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us ensure they're never forgotten. The glass towers of Phoenix's emerging tech district gleamed in the Arizona sun, housing dozens of ambitious startups and established companies chasing the next breakthrough. Among them, Sterling Dynamics occupied 3 floors of a prestigious building, its modern offices designed to project success, innovation, and cutting-edge technological prowess. At 34, Marcus Sterling embodied everything the tech industry celebrated: Harvard MBA, venture capital connections, and the kind of aggressive confidence that investors found compelling. His corner office overlooked the desert landscape, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that reminded him daily of how far he had climbed in such a short time. Sterling Dynamics specialized in aerospace software solutions, competing for lucrative government contracts and private space company partnerships. The company's 60 employees, engineers, programmers, project managers, were young, educated, and hungry for the stock options and bonuses that came with rapid growth. In this world of standing desks, craft coffee, and casual Friday dress codes, Robert Chen moved almost invisibly. At 65, he arrived each evening at 6 p.m., when most employees were heading home, and worked until midnight cleaning offices, emptying trash, and maintaining the pristine environment that Marcus insisted was essential for creative thinking. Robert wore simple clothes, khaki pants, polo shirts, comfortable shoes designed for long hours of walking and lifting. His gray hair was always neatly combed, his manner unfailingly polite, but he rarely spoke beyond basic pleasantries. To the few employees who noticed him at all, he was simply Bob the janitor, part of the building's infrastructure, as invisible as the air conditioning or wireless network. What none of them could see was the sharp intelligence behind Robert's quiet demeanor, or the careful way he observed their work, their problems, their endless meetings about technical challenges that he could solve in minutes. They didn't notice how he paused sometimes while emptying wastebaskets, reading discarded printouts of code or technical specifications with the quick comprehension of someone who understood not just what they were trying to accomplish, but why their approaches were fundamentally flawed. Robert had learned long ago that invisibility could be a choice. After 30 years of high-pressure engineering work, of being responsible for projects where failure meant lives lost and billions wasted, he had chosen simplicity. But intelligence, once developed, doesn't disappear just because someone prefers to empty trash cans rather than design spacecraft navigation systems. The collision between these two worlds began on a Tuesday evening when Robert arrived to find Marcus still in his office, pacing frantically while talking on a conference call with what sounded like very unhappy investors. Through the glass walls, Robert could see engineers hunched over computers, their usual confident energy replaced by something approaching desperation. Sterling Dynamics was facing its biggest crisis since the company's founding. A critical software module for their flagship aerospace navigation system had failed during testing, a failure so fundamental that it threatened not just their current contract, but their reputation in an industry where reliability meant everything. As Robert quietly emptied the wastebaskets in the main work area, he couldn't help but overhear the technical discussions. The engineers were debating solutions, their whiteboards covered with diagrams and code snippets, but their approaches revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the underlying physics involved in orbital mechanics. Marcus emerged from his office, his usual polished demeanor cracked by stress. He spotted Robert working nearby and seemed to find in him a convenient target for his frustration. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his tone carrying the particular condescension reserved for people he considered beneath his notice. "Could you clean that area later?" We're trying to solve a serious technical problem here, and we need to concentrate. Robert looked up from the trash can he was emptying, noting the equations on the nearby whiteboard, and immediately identifying 3 critical errors in their calculations. Of course, sir. I apologize for the disturbance, but something in Robert's tone, perhaps too articulate, too measured for Marcus's expectation of how a janitor should speak, seemed to irritate the young CEO further. You know what? Marcus continued, his voice loud enough for the nearby engineers to hear. Maybe this is a good time to clarify something. You're here to clean offices, not to listen to confidential business discussions. Just focus on the cleaning and leave the technology to people who actually understand it. Several engineers looked up from their computers, some embarrassed by their CEO's rudeness, others amused by what they saw as justified hierarchy enforcement. Robert absorbed the humiliation with the patience of someone who had learned that dignity was something you carried inside yourself, not something others could grant or take away. Understood, sir. I'll be more careful about timing. Marcus seemed to interpret Robert's calm response as submission rather than self-control. Good. I mean, no offense, but we're dealing with rocket science here. It's probably a little beyond... He gestured vaguely at Robert's cleaning supplies, leaving the sentence unfinished, but the meaning clear. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, one of the senior engineers, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had always been polite to Robert, occasionally exchanging pleasantries about weather or weekend plans. Watching him being humiliated by their CEO made her feel complicit in something ugly. Marcus, she said quietly, maybe we should just focus on the technical problem. But Marcus was on a roll, his stress and fear manifesting as cruelty toward someone he perceived as powerless to respond. No, Jennifer, this is important. Everyone needs to understand their role here. We pay good money for cleaning services, and we expect professional boundaries to be maintained. Robert continued working, his movements steady and unhurried despite the attention focused on him. Inside, he was calculating trajectory corrections and orbital insertion algorithms, but outwardly, he simply emptied trash cans and wiped down desks with the thoroughness that had made him a valued employee for 5 years. What Marcus and his team didn't realize was that their technical crisis was about to become an existential threat to the company. The failed navigation software wasn't just a setback, it was a fundamental flaw that would take months to redesign, assuming they could even identify the root cause. As Robert moved through the office, he observed their work with the experienced eye of someone who had solved similar problems when the stakes were literally life and death. Their approach to orbital mechanics was textbook correct but practically flawed, the kind of mistake that came from learning principles without understanding the real-world variables that made space travel so unforgiving. Marcus was back on the phone with investors, his voice carrying desperation as he tried to explain delays without admitting the extent of the problem. Through the glass walls of his office, his gestures became increasingly agitated as it became clear that confidence and charm couldn't solve engineering problems. Jennifer Walsh was leading a team of 5 engineers through their 3rd attempt at a solution, but their fundamental approach was wrong. They were treating the navigation problem as a pure mathematics exercise, not accounting for the gravitational anomalies, atmospheric variables, and mechanical tolerances that Robert's generation of engineers had learned to factor into every calculation. As Robert worked nearby, cleaning desks and organizing cables, he found himself mentally redesigning their entire approach. The solution wasn't just about correcting their math. It required rethinking their basic assumptions about how spacecraft actually behaved in the real environment of space. The crisis deepened as the evening progressed. Phone calls were made to other engineering firms, consultants were contacted, and emergency meetings were scheduled. Marcus's stress was visible to everyone in the office, and that stress was spreading to his employees like a contagion. "We're missing something fundamental," Jennifer said, staring at the whiteboard covered with equations that looked impressive but led nowhere useful. "It's like we're solving the wrong problem entirely." She was exactly right, though she didn't know it. Robert could have told her that their mathematical model assumed perfect spherical bodies and uniform gravitational fields, assumptions that worked fine in textbooks, but failed catastrophically when dealing with real celestial mechanics where gravitational fields varied and spacecraft had to account for the irregular shapes of planets and moons. Marcus overheard Jennifer's comment and exploded. "We can't be solving the wrong problem. This is exactly the same type of navigation system that SpaceX and Boeing use. Our math is solid, our programming is clean, and our testing protocols are industry standard." But being industry standard wasn't the same as being right, and Robert had learned during his NASA years that the most dangerous failures were the ones that looked correct on paper, but ignored the messy realities of physics. As the evening wore on, Robert watched Marcus's confidence crumble. The young CEO had built his company and his identity around being smarter than everyone else, but intelligence without experience was proving inadequate when faced with problems that required both theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. It was past 10 p.m. when Marcus finally noticed that Robert was still working, methodically cleaning the conference room where the engineering team had spent hours failing to solve their crisis. "Why are you still here?" Marcus asked, his tone carrying exhaustion rather than hostility. "Don't you usually finish earlier?" Robert looked up from wiping down the conference table, his expression as calm as ever. "The office seemed busier tonight. I wanted to make sure everything was clean for tomorrow." For a moment, Marcus seemed almost human, tired, overwhelmed, facing the possibility that his company might not survive its current crisis. But then his usual arrogance reasserted itself. "Well, make sure you don't disturb anything on those whiteboards. Those equations represent millions of dollars in development work." Robert glanced at the whiteboards, his trained eye immediately identifying not just the 3 fundamental errors he had noticed earlier, but several additional mistakes that would compound the problems, even if the first issues were resolved. "Of course, sir. I'll be very careful." As Marcus walked away, Robert continued his work, but his mind was no longer focused on cleaning supplies and trash schedules. For the first time in 5 years, he was thinking like an engineer again. The next morning brought news that transformed the crisis from urgent to desperate. The client, a major aerospace contractor with government connections, had moved up their deadline by 2 weeks. What had been a manageable timeline for fixing the navigation software had become impossible. Robert arrived for his evening shift to find the office in chaos. Engineers were working around the clock, surviving on energy drinks and determination, but their fundamental approach remained flawed. Marcus was barely holding together, his usual polished appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in days. As Robert began his cleaning routine, he overheard Marcus on yet another conference call, this time with the company's board of directors. The conversation was not going well. "We need more time," Marcus was saying, his voice strained. "This is cutting-edge technology. We can't just rush." He was interrupted by voices from the speakerphone, and his expression grew more desperate. "I understand the financial implications, but if we deliver faulty software, it could kill people." The irony wasn't lost on Robert. Marcus was absolutely right about the life-and-death stakes, but his team's approach would indeed result in faulty software, just not for the reasons they understood. It was Jennifer Walsh who finally broke. At nearly midnight, after 18 hours of continuous work, she stood up from her computer and announced to no one in particular, "This isn't working. We're not getting closer to a solution. We're just generating different versions of the same failure." The office fell silent except for the hum of computers and air conditioning. Marcus emerged from his office, looking like a man facing the collapse of everything he had built. "What are you saying, Jennifer?" "I'm saying we need outside help, real expertise, someone who's actually solved problems like this before, not just read about them in textbooks." Marcus's face flushed. "Are you questioning the competence of this entire team? Everyone here has advanced degrees, years of experience." "Experience with what?" Jennifer's exhaustion had burned away her usual diplomacy. "Building apps? Designing websites? Marcus, this is orbital mechanics. This is rocket science, real rocket science, not the kind we joke about when something seems difficult." Robert continued working, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces. But every word of the conversation was confirming what he had observed over the past 2 days. They were brilliant people working on the wrong problem with inadequate tools and incomplete understanding. As Jennifer and Marcus continued their argument, Robert found himself standing next to the whiteboard covered with their failed calculations. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket for a cleaning cloth, then stopped. On the board, clear as day, was a fundamental error in their gravitational constant calculations. Not wrong exactly, but incomplete. They were using textbook values that didn't account for the gravitational variations that any spacecraft would encounter in actual flight. "Excuse me," Robert said quietly. The arguing stopped. Everyone in the office turned to look at the janitor who had spoken during their technical crisis meeting. Marcus's face immediately hardened. "What did I tell you about boundaries? This is not your concern." But Robert had spent 30 years being responsible for missions where human lives depended on getting the math exactly right. The habit of speaking up when he saw potentially fatal errors was stronger than any desire to remain invisible. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an error in your gravitational calculations." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked like Robert had just claimed to be an alien visitor. Jennifer stared at the janitor with confusion mixed with curiosity. "What did you just say?" Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. Robert looked around the room at the faces focused on him, some amused, some annoyed, some simply puzzled that their janitor was discussing orbital mechanics. "The gravitational constant you're using," Robert said, pointing to a specific equation on the whiteboard. "It assumes uniform gravitational fields, but real spacecraft have to account for variations. The moon's gravitational field alone has mascons, mass concentrations, that will throw off any navigation system that doesn't compensate for them." Jennifer Walsh felt something click in her mind. She walked over to the whiteboard and stared at the equation Robert had indicated. "Mascons," she said slowly. "Gravitational anomalies. We haven't been accounting for." She turned to look at Robert with an expression approaching shock. "How do you know about mascons?" Marcus stepped forward, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "This is ridiculous. We're not taking technical advice from the cleaning staff. Robert, I want you to finish your work and leave. Now." But Jennifer was already moving toward her computer. "Wait, he's right about the mascons. I should have thought of that myself. If we're not accounting for gravitational variations." She began typing rapidly, pulling up reference materials and gravitational field maps. "Jennifer," Marcus said, his voice tight with authority, "step away from the computer. We are not redesigning our navigation system based on suggestions from the janitor." Robert could see that his intervention had created exactly the kind of confrontation he had spent 5 years avoiding. But watching these intelligent people fail because of pride and ignorance was something he couldn't tolerate, especially when their failure might ultimately cost lives. "Mr. Sterling," Robert said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made everyone in the room pause. "I've been cleaning this office for 5 years. I've watched your teamwork, listened to your discussions, observed your problem-solving approaches. You're making fundamental errors that will result in system failures." The room had gone completely silent. Marcus looked like he was about to explode, but something in Robert's tone, the calm confidence of someone who actually knew what he was talking about, gave him pause. "And you think you can solve problems that our entire engineering team can't handle?" Robert met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I believe I can." What happened next would be remembered by everyone in that office for the rest of their careers. Robert Chen, the invisible janitor who had been dismissed and humiliated for 5 years, walked calmly to the whiteboard and began to write. But he didn't just correct their equations, he redesigned their entire approach. His handwriting was neat and precise, his mathematical notation elegant and efficient. Within minutes, he had identified not just the gravitational field errors, but flaws in their orbital insertion calculations, mistakes in their attitude control algorithms, and oversights in their fuel consumption models. Jennifer Walsh watched in growing amazement as Robert rewrote months of their work, not just fixing their mistakes, but improving their fundamental approach. "This is," she whispered, then louder, "this is brilliant." Marcus, look at this approach to the three-body problem. This is graduate-level orbital mechanics. Marcus stood frozen, watching the janitor he had humiliated systematically demonstrate a mastery of aerospace engineering that exceeded anything his highly educated team had produced. "Where did you learn this?" Jennifer asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity and growing respect. Robert continued writing, completing an elegant solution to their navigation problem in about 15 minutes. When he finished, he set down the marker and turned to face the room full of engineers who were staring at him as if he had just performed magic. "I worked for NASA for 30 years, he said simply. "I was the lead engineer on the Apollo Lunar Module Navigation Systems, senior designer for the Space Shuttle Orbital Maneuvering System, and project manager for the Mars Pathfinder mission guidance software." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the full implication of Robert's words hit him. Jennifer was staring at the whiteboard, then at Robert, then back at the whiteboard, as if trying to reconcile the janitor she had known for years with the engineering genius whose work she was looking at. "You're Robert Chen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Robert Chen. I studied your papers on orbital rendezvous in graduate school. You're famous." Robert smiled modestly. "I was Robert Chen. Now I'm just Bob the janitor. But the math doesn't change, and bad engineering is still bad engineering, regardless of who points it out." Marcus found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Why didn't you ever say anything? Why work as a janitor when I'm what? When I'm qualified to run an aerospace company?" Robert's tone remained gentle, but there was steel underneath. "I retired from NASA 15 years ago. I came to Phoenix for the quiet, for the desert, for the chance to live simply. I took this job because I wanted to be useful without being responsible for billion-dollar projects or human lives." He gestured toward the whiteboard. "But I couldn't watch you fail, especially when your failure might ultimately hurt people. The navigation system you were developing would work fine in computer simulations, but it would fail catastrophically in real space environments." Jennifer was now working frantically at her computer, inputting Robert's corrected equations and running simulations. "Marcus!" she called out, excitement building in her voice. "His corrections work. The navigation errors are gone. The system is stable. This solves everything." Marcus looked around the room at his team of engineers, all of whom were now focused on Robert with expressions of awe and respect. The man he had dismissed as just the janitor had just saved his company and possibly his career. "Dr. Chen," Marcus began, then stopped, apparently unable to find words adequate to the situation. Robert picked up his cleaning supplies. "Mr. Sterling, your navigation system will work now, but you might want to consider hiring engineers who understand the difference between theoretical physics and applied engineering. And perhaps," he paused at the door, "treat all your employees with respect, regardless of their job titles. You never know what people are capable of until you give them the chance to show you." As Robert prepared to leave, Marcus called out desperately, "Wait! Dr. Chen, we need to talk. About your position here, about consulting, about—" Robert smiled. "Mr. Sterling, we'll talk. But not tonight. Tonight your team has work to do implementing these corrections, and I have offices to clean." He walked out, leaving behind a room full of people whose understanding of intelligence, respect, and hidden potential had been fundamentally changed. The next morning brought a transformation that extended far beyond corrected equations and functional software. Word of Robert Chen's revelation had spread through Phoenix's tech community with the speed that only industry gossip could achieve. By noon, Marcus was fielding calls from aerospace companies, investment firms, and technology journalists who wanted to know how Sterling Dynamics had convinced a NASA legend to work as their janitor. Marcus spent the morning in damage control mode, trying to explain the situation without admitting the extent to which he had mistreated and underestimated Dr. Chen. But in an industry where reputation mattered enormously, news traveled fast, and the story that emerged wasn't flattering to his leadership. Robert arrived for his shift to find Marcus waiting for him in the lobby, along with Jennifer Walsh and 2 other senior engineers. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept, which was probably accurate. "Dr. Chen," Marcus began formally, "I owe you an enormous apology. My behavior was unprofessional, disrespectful, and completely inappropriate. I had no idea who you were, but that's no excuse for how I treated you." Robert nodded calmly. "Apology accepted, Mr. Sterling. But the real issue isn't who I am, it's how you treat people based on assumptions about their value. If I had just been Bob the janitor with no engineering background, would my dignity have mattered less?" Marcus swallowed hard. "No, sir, you're absolutely right. I was wrong regardless of your background." Jennifer stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, we've been discussing your situation. We'd like to offer you a position as our Chief Technology Officer. Full equity, competitive salary, complete authority over technical decisions." Robert smiled at the offer, but shook his head. "I appreciate the gesture, Dr. Walsh, but I'm happy with my current position. I like the quiet, the routine, the lack of pressure. What I would like is to be treated with the same respect you'd show any employee." Marcus looked confused. "But Dr. Chen, you could revolutionize our entire company. Your expertise, your experience, we could dominate the aerospace software market." "Mr. Sterling," Robert said patiently, "I spent 30 years dominating aerospace markets. I helped put men on the moon, designed systems that kept astronauts alive in space, and managed projects worth billions of dollars. I've had enough revolution for one lifetime." He paused, considering. "However, I might be willing to serve as an occasional consultant when you encounter problems that require real expertise rather than just enthusiasm and education." Over the following weeks, the dynamic at Sterling Dynamics changed completely. Robert continued his evening cleaning routine, but now engineers sought his advice on technical problems. Marcus treated him with genuine respect, and the company's reputation in the aerospace industry soared based on their association with Dr. Robert Chen. More importantly, the way employees treated each other began to change. Marcus's public humiliation at the hands of someone he had dismissed as insignificant had created a lasting lesson about assumptions, respect, and the hidden potential that exists in every person. 6 months after the navigation crisis, Marcus Sterling received a phone call that would fundamentally alter his understanding of success, wealth, and power. The caller was Patricia Martinez, a corporate attorney representing a client interested in acquiring Sterling Dynamics. "Mr. Sterling, my client has been impressed by your recent technical innovations and would like to discuss purchasing your company. Would you be available for a meeting this afternoon?" Marcus was intrigued. Sterling Dynamics had indeed been performing well since Dr. Chen's intervention, and acquisition interest from larger companies was exactly the kind of validation he had been seeking. "Certainly. Can you tell me who your client is?" "He prefers to remain anonymous until the meeting. He'll be accompanied by his technical advisor, but he's authorized me to say that he's prepared to make a very substantial offer." That afternoon, Marcus waited in his conference room with Jennifer Walsh and his other senior staff. When Patricia Martinez arrived with her client, Marcus expected to see another tech entrepreneur, or perhaps a representative from Boeing or Lockheed Martin. Instead, walking calmly into the conference room in his usual khaki pants and polo shirt was Robert Chen. The recognition hit Marcus like a physical blow. Robert took a seat at the head of the conference table with the relaxed confidence of someone who had done this many times before. "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling," Robert said pleasantly. "I believe we have some business to discuss." Marcus stared, speechless. Jennifer Walsh looked between Robert and the attorney, clearly trying to process what she was seeing. "Dr. Chen," Marcus managed, "I don't understand. Are you here as a technical consultant for the buyer?" Robert smiled. "No, Mr. Sterling. I am the buyer." Patricia Martinez opened a folder and slid documents across the table. "Dr. Chen is prepared to purchase Sterling Dynamics for $45 million, assuming standard due diligence requirements are met." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. $45 million. How? He looked at Robert, still processing the impossibility of what he was hearing. "You're a janitor." "No, Mr. Sterling. I'm a retired NASA engineer who chose to work as a janitor because I enjoyed the simplicity. But I've also been investing wisely for 30 years. I hold patents on navigation systems used by every major aerospace company, and I receive substantial consulting fees from governments and corporations around the world. Robert leaned back in his chair. My net worth is approximately $400 million. Your company is worth about $45 million. As I believe I mentioned once, I have about 10 times your company's value. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus remembered his dismissive comment about leaving technology to people who understood it, his arrogant assumption that a janitor couldn't possibly contribute to technical discussions. Why? Marcus asked weakly. Why do you want to buy the company? Because Sterling Dynamics has potential that's being wasted by poor leadership and closed-minded thinking. Because your employees deserve better management. And because I think it's time I came out of retirement. Robert stood up. You have 48 hours to consider the offer. If you accept, I'll be making some changes to the company culture and leadership structure. If you decline, I'll simply start a competing company and hire away your best engineers. As Robert prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Sterling, you're welcome to stay on as a junior engineer, assuming you can demonstrate the kind of respect for colleagues that we'll expect from all employees. 1 year later, Chen Dynamics, formerly Sterling Dynamics, had become one of the most respected aerospace software companies in the industry. Under Robert's leadership, the company had landed 3 major government contracts and had developed navigation systems that were being used by NASA, SpaceX, and several international space agencies. Marcus Sterling had accepted Robert's offer to remain as a junior engineer, a position that had taught him more about engineering, leadership, and humility than his MBA and previous executive experience combined. Working under Robert's mentorship, he was becoming a genuinely skilled engineer rather than just a talented salesman. Jennifer Walsh had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer, a position where her genuine technical skills and newfound understanding of respectful leadership made her invaluable. She often reflected on how close they had come to catastrophic failure because of their arrogance and assumptions. Robert still arrived at the office each evening, but now he came as CEO and chief engineer rather than janitor. He maintained the same quiet dignity, the same respectful treatment of all employees, and the same modest lifestyle that had characterized his years of invisibility. The most significant change was in the company culture. Chen Dynamics had become known throughout the industry as a place where ideas were judged on their merit rather than their source, where experience was valued alongside education, and where every employee, from intern to executive, was treated with genuine respect. The next time you encounter someone whose job seems lesser than yours, remember Robert Chen. Remember that intelligence, wisdom, and capability exist at every level of every organization, often hidden behind assumptions about what smart people are supposed to look like. The person cleaning your office might be a retired engineer. The person serving your coffee might be a published author. The person driving your taxi might be a former professor. And the person you dismiss because of their age, their appearance, or their job title might be someone whose knowledge and experience could change your life, if you're wise enough to listen. True intelligence recognizes that learning can come from anywhere, that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, and that respect should be given freely rather than earned through credentials or status. The most dangerous assumption is that we already know everything we need to know about someone based on their job title or appearance. In the workplace, as in life, the moment we stop seeing people as individuals with unique stories and capabilities is the moment we limit not just their potential, but our own. Every person carries a lifetime of experience and knowledge that deserves respect and attention. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with others. Help us ensure these tales of hidden genius and workplace wisdom reach the people who need to hear them. Because the most valuable lessons often come from the people we least expect to teach us, and the greatest discoveries happen when we finally learn to listen. Thank you for watching Hidden Story. We'll see you in the next episode, where another extraordinary person waits to be discovered, Another lesson waits to be learned, and another reminder awaits that genius often hides in the most ordinary places.